In today's video, I'm going to be continuing with my journey through the Bloodmoon DLC featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Last time, I heard about the island of Solstheim and traveled there via boat. After becoming acquainted with the garrison at Fort Frostmoth, things there seemed tense and off. Captain Carius, the commander of the fort, sent me out on a couple of missions involving corruption amongst the troopers. After returning from the last outing, I learned that in my absence, werewolves attacked the fort and Carius went missing. Gaia Artoria, a high-ranked soldier, asked me to investigate the Skaal, a native tribe to the island. After meeting with their leader, Tharstan Heartfang, it was clear that they had nothing to do with the attack. However, in order to find out more information, I got close with the clan and embarked on the Skaal test of loyalty. There are 6 ritual stones that need to be activated via some sort of trial. Up until now, the beast, trees, and technically wind rituals have been completed. This is where the journey continues. At this point, a blizzard was kicking up, and it reminded me a lot of the ash storms back on Vardenfell. Other than for the added immersion, I assume that these were included to make visibility a little worse at certain times. Taking a peek at the map, the next closest landmark was the Sunstone in the southeastern corner of the island. Lucky for me, one good jump with my leap spell pretty much put me right in front of it. Interacting with the stone, it told me to go west and free the warm sun from the halls of Penumbra. This was one of the few tales from the story of Avar that really piqued my interest. It mentioned unholy beasts and monsters that would tear your flesh from bone. I was very curious to see what exactly these creatures were, although I had a slight feeling that I'd already encountered them. Running west, the pathway was practically already carved out for me. Slaying the exterior's defenses, I readied myself and went on into the halls of Penumbra. Not much of a shocker, my guess was correct. The unholy beasts were Draugr. Again, I think they did a great job at making the Draugr seem more menacing in Bloodmoon than in Skyrim, but I guess I was unfamiliar with the fact that they ate human flesh. A detail that was either overlooked, retconned, or just not spoken of in the later installment. Shortly into the run, I received a journal update indicating that there was a glowing object behind a wall of ice, although I couldn't see it just yet. The halls of Penumbra were a relatively standard dungeon crawl. In terms of enemies, it mostly consisted of Draugr. They don't hit very hard, and a few swings with my sword and they were done. I will say though, the winding halls and meandering pathways made for some tricky navigation. Protruding from the walls of ice were strange hook-like objects. They almost looked like candle holders, and I wondered what they were for. Well, as it just so happens, I was about to find out. At the end of a long corridor was a lighter section of the dungeon. Guarding it though was a beast-like creature, one I had never seen before. Letting my curiosity get the better of me, I challenged it to martial combat and got a feel for its skill. The monster's health was barely going down with each hit, and what's more, my HP was draining rather quickly. It got the better of me on the first try, and I knew from there that it had to be taken seriously. So, running it back, I started off the battle with a heavy flame spell and came in swinging with Hope's Fire. It was still an incredibly close fight, but luckily I was the one to deliver the final hit. The beast was called Lightkeeper Grawl, and in its inventory was the Flaming Eye of the Lightkeeper, an artifact from the story of Avar. With the eye on my person, I approached the thin, translucent ice wall and interacted with it. Throwing the flame eye, the ice shattered and the light was released. Turning around, those hook, candle-like objects on the walls were now ablaze, lighting the way back out. Returning to the Sunstone and interacting with it, this trial was now completed. The next 2 stones were on the western side of the island, an area I haven't explored yet. So, taking a quick pit stop at Fort Frostmoth and having my gear repaired, I readied myself and set out northwest. Unsurprisingly, it was more of the same scenery. Although at one point, I stumbled across the plot of land that's now better known as Raven Rock. In Skyrim's Dragonborn DLC, this area looks very different. Something tells me though that my character is going to have a hand in those developments. Not too long after, I came across the second last landmark, the Earthstone. Interacting with it, it said, travel northeast to the Cave of the Hidden Music and hear the Song of the Earth. Deceptively close and to the northeast was a door called Bloodskull Barrow. Briefly wondering if that was the dungeon, I trusted my gut and traveled further. Instincts soon paid off, as I found the actual cave of hidden music and went on inside. In terms of enemies, this dungeon contained mostly Draugr, so nothing too crazy, and it was one of the first ones to contain more than one zone. Not too far into it, I came across a corpse that put a loose theory into my head. The skeletal remains contained old Nordic furs, some potions, Nord mead, and an ebony mace. If you recall, Avar Stonesinger was from an old Nordic tribe, the Skaal, and carried a mace as a weapon. This body has clearly been here for some time, so I wondered if there was any chance that this was Avar. Maybe the old Skaal legend was wrong or had been altered for educational purposes. What if Avar perished in the caverns of music and the Skaal have never actually been able to recover the gifts of the Allmaker? Hence why the player is out here right now, why there's a corpse with belongings matching those of Avar's, and why he's called Stonesinger, the last of the trials that he was able to complete, or the one that ended his life. I think it's an interesting idea, but it's probably more likely that this was a descendant of the Skaal who was tasked with restoring the oneness as well. They probably just mirrored the legend of Avar and weren't skilled enough to retrieve the gifts. Plus, without any spoilers, the reward for this quest pretty much lays any doubt to rest. After much exploration, I finally came across the second zone, the Chamber of Song. Going on inside, there weren't any enemies, but I was hit with these noises over and over again. It kind of sounds like a Wendy's parking lot at 11 PM. Traversing through the chamber and wandering around for a bit, I finally landed on the point of interest. An open room that contained the source of the tunes, if you can even call them that. There were 6 hollow stalagmites, 3 on the ceiling and 3 on the ground. The ones on the ceiling were blowing some form of steam into the ones on the ground, and that was creating the sound. Interacting with the bottom 3, I was actually able to make them produce noise, and of course each one had a different frequency. After fiddling around with them for a bit, I finally got the tune, and a new one was then introduced to the puzzle. I repeated the process, figuring out which stalagmite needed to be activated and at what time, and then finally received a journal update. The chamber quickly fell silent, and I was free to leave the Cave of Hidden Music. Wandering back to the Earthstone and interacting with it, this trial was complete, and now I was on to the final gift. The Waterstone was just north of my current location. This was the trial that Avar started with, and it was fitting that it'd be the one I ended with. This was also one that piqued my interest. A swimming test followed by a breath-holding competition. Eventually, through the thick blizzards, I laid eyes on the spire and interacted with it. The Waterstone displayed the message, travel west to a small island off of the coast and follow the swimmer to seek the waters of life. Following the instructions, it didn't take long before I spotted the small key. Laying at its center was a black horker, the exact creature described in Avar's story. Upon getting close to it, it got up and began flopping its way into the sea. From there, it submerged under the water, and I swam close behind it. It was a long and uneventful journey. In Avar's tale, that's exactly what was reported. I would have liked to have seen a little more from this part though, as I was literally swimming, unfazed, uninterrupted for 3 minutes. Finally, it stopped atop a water cave, and I went for the plunge of a lifetime. It turns out that my character's sprint was toggled off, and I didn't know it at the time, so the trek was pretty hairy. I quickly ran out of breath, but luckily the damage being dealt was laughable. Popping a health potion, I continued along until I reached the end of Stallman's Gorge. A skeleton was waiting for me on the other side and threw in some cheap shots. Taking care of it, there were some potions on the ground nearby, and one of them held the waters of life. The other 2 were performance enhancers for swimming. So, popping those and turning on the jets, I was out of there in no time and back at the Sea Stone. Interacting with it, that was the 6th and final task done, and all that was left was to hit the Windstone. Recalling to Skaal Village and quickly tagging the spire, I then legged it back to Tharston. Overall, it was a pretty entertaining quest. It was very long, which personally I prefer shorter sections of one storyline than one big quest telling the story, but that's just trivial. The highlights for me were the Earth, Beast, and Tree ritual. The first 2 had unique enough elements, activating the stalagmite and saving the bear, while the third was a really quick trial, so it didn't waste my time. The lows for me were probably the swimming and the sun ritual. The swimming one wasn't bad, it was just long and uneventful. The sun one wasn't bad either, it just felt like a pretty standard dungeon crawl. I thought the Lightkeeper was a neat final boss, so it had some points retained on that one. As for the Windstone, it's the epitome of a quick dungeon trek, but the Greedy Man's bag saved it for me, as I find his character really fascinating. Returning to the Great Hall, I spoke with Fang.
You were told to perform the rituals needed to restore the power of the Skaal. What have you done?
Giving him the lowdown, he was impressed with my efforts. I've shown loyalty to the tribe, but there's still a lot of work to be done. When ready, I should talk with him further in order to prove my wisdom. As a reward for these trials though, he hands me the Mace of Avar Stonesinger, a historical weapon that pretty much disproves my theory from before. It has the enchantment of frost damage for 8 points, and as far as I can tell is unique in its look. Its appearance is really neat, and I would have loved to have used it, but I'm not proficient with blunt weapons, so it'll just be a trophy for me. With that, thus ends the quest, the Skaal Test of Loyalty. Ready to continue my duties with the Skaal, I spoke again with Tharstan.
You have shown your loyalty to the Skaal.
Asking him about how I can prove my wisdom, he hits me with a pretty interesting task. Fang would like me to investigate a crime committed amongst the Skaal, and then pass the sentence on the guilty party. Inquiring further, apparently, Angar Icemane, an honorable warrior, has been accused of stealing furs from Rigmor Halfhand, a quote, very intelligent man. This quest was already so predictable. The furs were found in Icemane's residence, which looks bad for Angar. If found guilty, his punishment is either exile from the Skaal, meaning he's cast out and erased from the tribe's history, or he's to be sacrificed to the wolves, torn apart by ceremonial beasts so that his soul may be cleansed. Both sound bad, but to me one sounds much worse than the other. Apparently, death by wolves is more honorable for warriors, so Tharstan believes that's what he'll choose. Exiting the Great Hall, I located the accused, Angar, and spoke with him.
You, who are to be my judge, what would you ask of me?
As predicted, Icemane thinks exile is much worse than being eaten by wolves. I guess if the tribe is all he's ever known, then maybe. Anyways, I asked him about the alleged crime, and of course, Angar denied it. He called it a lie and said that he has no need of furs, which I think is very true. If he's a skilled warrior, surely he could just go out and get his own pelts. Why steal such an easy thing to obtain and risk getting tossed from the tribe? When asked about Rigmor, the pieces started to fall into place. Icemane thought that he was his friend. When the Nord left for hunts, Halfhand would keep his wife company. I couldn't help but slap my forehead after hearing this one. I then asked about Angar's wife, Risi, and he says that her life isn't easy when he's away for weeks at a time. Yeah man, I bet it isn't easy at all. Wanting to speak with her next, I cased the houses until I found the Icemane residence. Entering the home, I chatted with the Nord.
You are the one who is to investigate a crime that has been blamed on my husband. How may I help you?
Asking for her input, she doubled down that her husband is an honest man and would never do such a thing. She thinks that perhaps Rigmor is jealous of Angar and wants him out of the picture. When asked about the punishments, Risi would rather see her husband exiled than sacrificed to the wolves. Finally, someone has some sense about them. Well, sort of, because when asked about Rigmor, she pretty much alludes to the fact that they had some sort of an affair. They quote-unquote spent some ... time together, and now he wants to tear their family apart. With the story pretty much out there, all that's left is to get a confession or some evidence to use against Halfhand. Seeking out the man of the hour, Rigmor, we had a little chat. First, I asked about Risi. He said that she was a beautiful woman who deserved a better partner. He then hit me with the Reddit special saying if I were her mate, she would lead a much better life. I then asked about Angar. Halfhand spoke poorly about his character, saying he doesn't care for his wife and that he probably stole the furs because he can't support his family. Lastly, I asked about the crime. Rigmor said the obvious, that he doesn't know why he would have done such a thing. Icemane could have just asked for more furs, and that because of his actions, he'll be leaving his wife all alone. Asking around the village for opinions on the crime, all anyone could say is that the situation is terrible. With no more leads and no spoken confession, I began to look around Halfhand's home in order to find some physical evidence. No dice there, but that would change after searching through the Icemane residence. Looking all over the place, nothing jumped out at me or was super obvious. However, combing through the finer details, I noticed a note from Rigmor to Risi tucked under her pillow, which was strange. Why keep the letter and hide it, so Angar doesn't find out? Wouldn't this be the perfect evidence to come forward with in order to save your husband? In any case, the note reads, "Dearest Risi, why will you not see me? You know how I feel, and I know you feel the same about me. Please, simply consent to speak to me. Just a word, a moment with you would ease my soul. If I cannot be with you, I will have to resort to something drastic. Please consider your feelings. Your husband is a lout, away for weeks at a time, with no consideration for your needs. I have always been there for you, and I always will be. We should be together, dear Risi. Signed, R.H." Confronting Angar's wife with the note, she said Rigmor's words are like honey and that he's a clever man. Sure, she was emotionally manipulated in a vulnerable state, but this is evidence that could exonerate your husband and save his life, so why is she withholding it? I understand it's not to bring shame onto her, but if the player didn't step up, Angar would have been a goner, and for what? So Rigmor can white knight his wife? What she did was technically an obstruction of justice, but that's a problem for another day, I suppose. Back to the matter at hand, I confronted Halfhand with the letter, and the truth quickly came out. After trying to come up with more lies, he gave in and admitted that he just wanted Risi, a real shocker. Rigmor then becomes very cooperative and allows me to escort him back to the Great Hall. Half expecting him to start attacking me, it never came, and he faced Tharstan head on.
You were to investigate a crime. Have you done this?
Informing Heartfang of my findings, he's shocked at the true outcome and says that Rigmor must be penalized. He's faced with the same outcomes as Angar was, either exile or death by wolves. The choice is up to me. Even though Tharstan feels it's an honorable and merciful end for Halfhand, I ended up picking the wolves because to me that's a brutal way to go. The shaman is currently summoning the Cainlorn, and as a gift for all of the work I put in, Heartfang gives me the helm of the wolf's heart. Its light armor has the enchantment of fortify agility and sneak for 5 points, and kind of looks like the poop emoji. Escorting Rigmor to the pen, he ends up bumping into Angar on his way over, which I felt was intentional.
You have cleared my name and restored my honor. What can I do for you, my friend?
Quickly speaking with the now free man, I asked about his wife. His outlook was rather interesting. He says that even though she made mistakes, it's his fault for not paying enough attention to her, and ultimately Rigmor's for meddling in their marriage. I'm no couples counselor, so I won't be getting involved with that any further. Finally, Halfhand put himself in the pen, and after a forced wait, because nothing was happening, the wolves made their move. Rigmor quickly fell, and the whole ordeal was put in the past. Returning to Tharstan, he says that I've displayed my loyalty and wisdom. However, there's one more step. I must prove my strength as a warrior. With that, thus ends the quest, the Skaal test of wisdom. Chatting again with Heartfang, I followed up on our last conversation. He wants me to go to the northern shores of Lake Fjelding and seek out Korst Windeye. There, he'll be the one to give me further instructions. Leaving the Great Hall and legging it south, it didn't take me long to find the shaman. But before then, I laid eyes on something weird. At the center of the lake was a massive fire. This was especially strange because it was all water and ice, so the flames had to be magical in nature.
Ah, you've arrived. These are strange times, my friend.
Chatting with Windeye, he said he isn't sure what's causing the magic on the lake, but that's going to be part of my trial. When asked about the disturbance, Korst says that Tharstan believes it's being produced by a Draugr lord from under the lake. However, he believes that it could be an omen of the Bloodmoon prophecy, something that he fears. Finally getting a DLC name drop, I inquired about said prophecy. He didn't share much on it, and the little that he did say was pretty obvious. A red moon and werewolves. Back to the matter at hand, I asked about the trial and he gave me some orders. I'm to dive beneath the lake and into some ice caves. There, I'll find Aislip, a Draugr lord. Aislip was once a powerful mage turned necromancer. Dabbling with dark arts caused him to turn into an undead being, and I'm to put him down once and for all. As I left the conversation, Windeye told me to take care as this whole situation seemed really odd. Diving to the bottom of Lake Fjelding and swimming underneath the fire, I found the caves of Fjelding and went on inside. Immediately, I was attacked by Draugr and Bone Wolves. Nothing too challenging though, as I was able to maneuver freely. The ice caves were pretty massive. The first zone consisted of long corridors filled with lesser enemies and petty loot. Soon though, I arrived at the second zone, Aislip's lair, and prepared myself for what was to come. Stumbling through more icy hallways, the area was fairly void of life. Finally, I landed on Aislip's den and found the Draugr Lord himself. Oddly enough though, he didn't aggro onto me. Upon getting close, he actually began speaking out. He said I was either brave or foolish for coming here. He threatens to kill me if I get in the way of his task, but he senses some wisdom in me. The Draugr Lord says that there are more dangerous things in this cave than an undead being. Deciding to humor him, I asked about his task. Aislip has been down here for a long time. He shares no love for the Draugr I encountered before and calls his story different. He apparently used to be a member of the Skaal, a very skilled mage who got tempted by more power and delved into the black arts. After word got out, he was cast out of the tribe, and that's how he found himself in here. This, however, didn't stop him from pursuing more forbidden knowledge. He started communicating with the Daedra, and soon learned that there was a plan to wipe out the Skaal. There are frost atronachs in the levels below this one, and after learning that he wasn't the one who conjured them, he knew he had to do something. He tried to warn the Skaal, but they wouldn't listen. So, in a desperate act, he created a magical barrier to contain them in the caves. He was able to keep the barrier intact all these years through the use of necromancy, by turning himself into a Draugr. He says that I can choose to fight with him or against him. The former would put an end to the Daedric threat, while the latter would only prolong it. Picking the obvious, I teamed up with Lord Aislip, and together we moved into Zone 3, the Caverns. There are approximately 10 frost atronachs in here that need to be dealt with. They aren't necessarily trickier than the average frosty, but their close proximity to one another can lead you to being outnumbered. Fortunately, Aislip puts up a good fight and provides decent aid. It's neat that I just learned about banishment from the Skaal and what it entails. Having your name erased from the tribe's history and getting excommunicated. This is sort of what happened to Aislip, but somehow Tharstan knew of his existence. Maybe the Skaal actually took note of his warnings, but didn't have it in them to give him the acknowledgement that he was looking for. As such, they know him only as the Draugr Lord, and not the member of the Skaal that he once was. My guess is that he was the clan's shaman. As far as I can tell, they're the only ones who really practice with a lot of magicka. It's a pretty interesting backstory, and I wonder if there's any way of clearing his name from the history books, or adding it back in for that matter. Even though the tribe turned their backs on him, he protected them for centuries. Once all of the atronachs were defeated, Aislip spoke with me once more. He said that his mission was completed, and that it's time for him to rest. As a thank you, he gave me his ring, in hopes that it'll help me with the rest of my adventure. Aislip's ring has the enchantments of Fortify Willpower for 10 points and Fortify Magicka for 75 points. A big upgrade from what I'm currently using. With nothing more to do down here, I returned topside and sought out Korst on the northern shore. Informing him of what had just transpired, he says that there was more to the Draugr than anyone could have imagined. And you know what? That's a good enough response for me. I've earned Windeye's acceptance into the Skaal, and he says that he'll meet me back at the village. With that, thus ends the quest, the Skaal Test of Strength. So far, I'm really enjoying my time playing through this DLC. I'll save most of my overall thoughts for the end, but just as a small check-in, I thought I'd mention that. I'm still beyond curious as to what happened with Captain Carius, and in fact, I'm worried that I'll never find out as the story is progressing. But things are about to take a turn. Running up the hill and over to the village, I spoke with Tharstan again. He seemed surprised that I returned and quickly dismissed me, saying that he had matters to attend to. As soon as I turned around, The honor guard yelled for me across the hall, and my ears were met with this super violent tearing noise and the sounds of animals snarling. He exclaimed that the village was under attack by werewolves and that my help was needed. A horrible event for the village, but a long-awaited moment for me. All Heartfang could say was to go help our people, which I was pretty touched by. Taking up arms, I charged outside and witnessed the same scene that must have taken place back at Frostmoth. Wolves standing on two legs were swiping, clawing, and bashing their way through the Skaal. My first observations were that they moved quickly, hit hard, and had lots of health. Finally, a worthy opponent. In fact, something I really liked was their power balance. They weren't hard to defeat, but I actually had to try. They were more than nuisance creatures, and if I didn't take them seriously, they would best me. The only thing that kind of threw me off, and maybe it's because I'm used to them being massive in Skyrim, they're a lot shorter than I thought they'd be. They're hunched, so that doesn't help, but they're probably no taller than the average male Bosmer. It slightly takes away from their intimidation factor, but there's nothing wrong with being a short king. Once all of the wolves were killed outside, I went back into the Great Hall and witnessed the honor guard get slaughtered. This moment was a perfect example for what I had previously mentioned. It was 2 against 1, and thinking I could leisurely take them out was a big mistake. My health dropped, theirs didn't, and I was forced to make a tactical retreat. Abusing some restoration spells, I went back into the hall and finished the job. Interestingly, Tharstan Heartfang was nowhere to be seen. There was no body or trace of where he could have gone. Exactly like what happened with Captain Carius, the other leader over at the other settlement. The plot thickens, and so do my suspicions and theories. It's early, and I'm probably wrong, but for now, my best guesses are that both men were taken as hostages by some greater power. I know, extremely obvious. Or that both are werewolves and can't control their transformations anymore. This idea makes less sense for Carius, as he fought against the wolves with the Legion, but at this point, I'm just spitballing. Exiting the Great Hall, Korst Windeye is now standing in the middle of the village.
I know you have been infected by these werewolves.
Chatting with him, he opens by saying that he only just arrived. He expresses gratitude for my defense of the Skaal, but bears bad news. Firstly, Korst admits that these are werewolves, shocker, and that this is a bad sign, another shocker. Secondly, and this one is the bomb I've been waiting for, he's able to detect via magic that I've been infected with lycanthropy, or Sanus lupinus as it's called in this game. This is it, the moment I had hoped would come, and it finally did. The choice to become a werewolf or not. Korst warns me that at first, the infection seems harmless. However, after 3 days, the affliction fully sets in, and I'll become a full-fledged werewolf. All I have to do to cure it though is to drink a potion of cure disease, or to cast the common spell. Until then, the Skaal want nothing to do with me. At first, the decision seems obvious. Drink the potion. However, upon doing a little bit of research, my next course of action will determine the preceding events, and change the questline and story. For now, he's right. Sanus lupinus only drains 1 point of fatigue, not really something that I'd notice. With that, thus ends the quest, the Siege of Skaal Village. Now, of course I have to see how both sides of the story fall into place. With that being said, I'll be running through the rest of this questline both as a werewolf and as a cured man. Even though I do desperately want to see the werewolf side first, and I'm sure you do as well, I decided to be a healthy man first. I want the werewolf timeline to be my canon one, and I also figured it would be better to end the adventure with the more interesting string of events. I could be completely wrong that it's the more intriguing side of the story, I'm just assuming, but I sort of doubt that the werewolf gameplay is more boring. So for now, I went into my inventory, grabbed a singular potion of cure disease, and popped it. Right away, my Sanus lupinus disappeared, and I was back to regular old me. Approaching Windeye, I spoke with him again. He asked if I had taken care of my infection, to which I told him yes. His magic no longer detects it on me, so it must be true. Korst thanks me for all I've done for the Skaal, as well as my recent contributions to the tribe's well-being and defenses. As a way to honor me, he names me Bloodskull, a blood friend to the clan. He gives me Rigmore's old home, and finishes by mentioning that he wants me to take part in a ceremony called the Ristaag. The Ristaag is essentially a cleansing for the Skaal. Due to the recent omens, attacks, and disappearances, Windeye feels as though it's necessary for one to take place. However, in order for it to happen, the totem of Claw and Fang needs to be retrieved. It's apparently a powerful artifact used to summon the sacred beasts for the ceremony. It was lost long ago, but its location has been narrowed down to the nearby tombs of Skaal. Exiting the conversation, I surveyed the village a bit before setting off. It's not lost on me that Korst only showed up after the battle. He had some business to take care of, didn't return with me to the village, and werewolves then attacked. Tharstan goes missing, and after all is said and done, he just appears in the center of town saying that the situation is horrible. I might be grasping at straws here, and a lot of my theories might just be me overthinking, but some real strange coincidences have been happening, and I really hope that I get some answers sooner than later. I'm hooked, the story's got me, but if it ends up trolling me along like From Season 3, I'm not going to be too pleased. Eventually, after some exploration, I located the tombs of Skaal and went on inside. I don't know why I didn't expect it, but the werewolves in there took me by surprise. I thought for sure there would be Draugr inside, and getting charged by a lycanthrope had me jolt out of my seat a bit. Again, I'd like to reiterate what I said before. Potentially one of the best enemies that I've gotten to face in a long time. They're perfect for my power level. I could kill them with a few swings of my blade, but I have to respect them, as otherwise they quickly get the better of me. I felt like I actually needed to lock in, and it wasn't just another mindless dungeon crawl. I think it's safe to say that in terms of the main questline, from here on out, Draugr, Spriggans, bears, wolves, etc. were out, and werewolves were in. Now, while the enemies themselves forced me to really pay attention to my surroundings, the actual crawl itself was pretty mundane. A series of natural tunnels interweaving and looping with one another in order to create a maze-like environment. The standard for what I've experienced with both Morrowind and Oblivion. Eventually, I ended up finding the right pathway and happened across a locked chest. Cracking it with a spell, the totem of Claw and Fang was inside, and that was pretty much the end of the dungeon for me. The necklace wasn't enchanted, nor did it have any crazy abilities, but I suppose it works best in the hands of the shaman. With nothing left here for me to do, I cast Recall and teleported to the Skaal village.
Strange signs carried on the wind.
Chatting with Korst, I handed over the totem and he was over the moon. As a thank you, he taught me the spell to summon wolves. Windeye says that it's time to go forward with the Ristaag and there's still much to be done. Now, I already know I'm an Elder Scrolls dummy, but either the spell was bugged or I was doing it wrong. I cast Call Wolf over and over again, yet nothing was happening. My post-gameplay recording theory is that it literally pulls a nearby wolf to fight for me, and that it doesn't summon the Canelorn wolves. Either that, or it's bugged. With that, thus ends the quest, the Totem of Claw and Fang. Resuming my conversation with Korst.
Greetings, Bloodskull. You and I must speak of the Ristaag.
He said that it's time to please the Allmaker. When the Ristaag was brought up, he asked that I go and find someone named Rolf Longtooth, a Skaal hunter. Rolf is stationed somewhere on the western shores of Lake Fjölding. So I haven't yet discussed who I think the Allmaker / Allfather is. My opinion is pretty simple. I believe it's a manifestation or a version of Shor / Lorkhan. They believe in the same Atmoran principles that Ysgramor and the Companions did, but centuries apart from the mainland shaped their appreciation more towards nature and its provisions. However, the Skaal religion is pretty different from the usual worship that we see back on Skyrim. I've seen opinions online that the Allmaker is either Anu or Anu and Padme, or even an unidentified entity that could be Kynareth's husband. I'd be willing to bet that I won't get a definitive answer in this playthrough. Back to the matter at hand, I had a lot of difficulty locating Rolf Longtooth. Windeye told me that he was on the western shores of Lake Fjölding, yet he was nowhere to be found. As it would turn out, Rolf is actually located in the forest northwest of the lake. It's a little spot that's practically impossible to see from the shores themselves. I spent a good couple of minutes running circuits around Fjelding because I thought it was a me problem. Finally reaching the hunter, he was standing with two other members of the Skaal, Grerid Axewife and Satyr the Bold. Approaching Longtooth, I spoke with him.
Greetings, Blood Skaal. Coursed Wind-Eye has told me much about you.
Mentioning the Ristaag, Rolf explains a bit about what's going to happen. The totem of Claw and Fang will conjure up the spirit bear in which the four of us will hunt. The aim is to bring its heart back to Korst, as that's the offering to the Allmaker. We'll have until sunrise to complete the Ristaag, and there are also other ways to fail it, although Rolf doesn't mention exactly what. I'm to follow closely behind Longtooth and to listen to him very carefully. Excited and eager to go, Grerid walked off to the east, Satyr to the west, and Longtooth to the south. No more than a couple of seconds into the journey, we heard the violent snarls of wolves and a man yelp. Rolf asked me to check on Satyr and then come right back. Straying maybe 10 or so meters to the right, behind a boulder was Bold's dead body. A scary sight for sure. I returned to Rolf and he explained that the werewolves are going to try and disrupt our hunt. The best we can do though is continue onward. A little nerve-wracking to hear, but nothing we can't handle. Walking south for a couple more seconds, the same vicious growls were heard, and this time a woman screamed. Rolf once again asked me to check on our party member and then return right back. This time, Axewife's body was within eyeshot, and there's no reason we both couldn't have gone over or simply cut our losses from afar. Again though, I confirmed that she was dead and reported back to Longtooth. It was now just us left, but Rolf was still confident that we could complete the Ristaag. Together, we wandered through the woods, and after a short time, the werewolves sprung upon us. We were ambushed by 3 lycanthropes. Alone, this would have been a really tricky fight. With Rolf to tank though, I could swing away with Hope's Fire and kill the beasts quickly. Soon, the threats were eliminated, and I spoke with Longtooth. With the fallen Skaal avenged, our only focus now was to slay the spirit bear and retrieve the heart. In the corner of my eye, I saw a white bear roaming through the forests. Remembering that the good beast was also a polar bear, I honed in on the creature and together with Rolf, we began attacking. It had a lot more health than the average beast, and to me that was the tip-off that I was on the right track. Overall, not a difficult fight though. Checking its inventory after, it had the heart of the spirit bear, which was perfect. Rolf told me to bring it back to the village as soon as possible. He said that I'd done well for myself and now considers me a friend. He's going to stay here and wander the woods for some time, but for now I should go on alone. Not needing to hear any more, I recalled to the Skaal village and presented the heart to Korst. He was thrilled with the Ristaag success, and as a reward, Wind-Eye taught me the Summon Bear spell. Closing out the conversation, he says that it's finally time to start discussing the ominous signs that have been appearing all across Solstheim. Perhaps he'll fill me in more on the whole Bloodmoon prophecy and what's really going on here. Where's Captain Carius? Where's Tharstan? And what's going on with all the werewolves? Once again, I need my Elder Scrolls for Dummies book, as the Summon Bear spell wasn't conjuring up a bear, but my post-gameplay thought is that it calls a bear over from the wild. I'll find out soon enough. With that, thus ends the quest, the Ristaag.